So, good morning, everyone. We'll begin with the reflections on universal well-being. May I abiding well-being in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action, and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action. Its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts, they will be the heirs. Okay, we'll continue to follow Ajahn Mun's life. So this continues on after his adventures in Sarika Cave. So he's still at Sarika Cave, and it's describing another monk who lives nearby. So at the foot of the mountain, where the path of Sarika Cave began, stood a Vipassana meditation center, the residence of an elderly monk who was ordained late in life, after having a wife and family. Maybe like Jing Fo Shi or Jing Liang Shi. Thinking of this monk one evening, Ajahn Mun wondered what he was doing, and so he sent out his flow of consciousness to take a look. At that moment, the old monk's mind was completely distracted by thoughts of the past concerning the affairs of his home and family. Again, setting out his flow of consciousness to observe him later that same night, Ajahn Mun encountered the same situation. Just before dawn, he focused his chitta once again, only finding that the old monk was still busily making plans for his children and grandchildren. Each time he sent out the flow of his chitta to check, he found the monk thinking incessantly about matters concerned with building a worldly life now, and untold rounds of existence in the future. On the way back from his alms round that morning, he stopped to visit the elderly monk and immediately put him on the spot. "How's it going, old fellow? Building a new house and getting married to your wife all over again? You couldn't sleep at all last night. I suppose everything's all arranged now, so you can relax in the evenings, without having to get so worked up planning that what you'll say to your children and grandchildren. I suspect you were so distracted by all that business last night, you hardly slept a wink. Am I right?" Embarrassed, the elderly monk just gave a sheepish smile. "You knew about last night? You're really incredible, Ajahn Mun." Ajahn Mun smiled in reply. "I'm sure you know yourself much better than I do, so why ask me? I'm convinced you were thinking about those things quite deliberately, so preoccupied with your thoughts you neglected to lie down and sleep all night. Even now you continue to shamelessly enjoy thinking about such matters. You don't have any mindfulness to stop yourself. You're still determined to act upon those thoughts, aren't you?" As he finished speaking, Ajahn Mun noticed this elderly monk looked rather pale, as though about to faint from shock or embarrassment. He mumbled something incoherent in a faltering, ghostly-sounding voice bordering on madness. Seeing his condition, Ajahn Mun instinctively knew that any further discussion will have serious consequences. So he found an excuse to change the subject, talking about other matters for a while to calm him down. Then he returned to the cave. 3 days later, the old monk's lay supporters came to the cave. Acharya Mun asked them about the monk. The layman said that he abruptly left the previous morning with no intention of returning. The layman had asked him why he was in such a hurry to leave. He said, "How can I stay here any longer? The other morning, Acharya Mun stopped by and lectured me so poignantly that I almost fainted right there in front of him. Had he continued lecturing on that spot, I'm sure to have passed out and died. As it was, he stopped and changed the subject, so I managed to survive somehow. How can you expect me to remain here now after that? I'm leaving today." The layman asked, "Did Acharya Mun scold you harshly? Is that why you nearly died and you can't feel you can stay here any longer?" "He didn't scold me at all, but his astute questions were far worse than a tongue lashing." "He asked you some questions, is it? Can you tell me what they were? Perhaps I can learn a lesson from them." "Please don't ask me to tell you what he said. I'm embarrassed to death as it is. Should anyone else know, I'd rather sink into the ground. Without getting specific, I can tell you this much. He knows everything we're thinking. No scolding could possibly be as bad as that. It's quite natural for people to think of good thoughts and bad thoughts. Who can control them? But when I discover that Acharya Mun knows all my private thoughts, that's too much. I know I can't stay on here. Better to go off and die somewhere else than to stay here and disturb him with my wayward thinking. I mustn't stay here, further disgracing myself. Last night, I couldn't sleep at all. I just can't get this matter out of my mind." The layman begged to differ. "Why should Acharya Mun be disturbed by what you think? He's not the one at fault. The person at fault is the one who should be disturbed by what he's done, and then make a sincere effort to rectify it. That Acharya Mun would certainly appreciate. So please stay on for a while, and that way, when those thoughts arise, you can benefit from Acharya Mun's advice. Then you can develop the mindfulness needed to solve this problem, which is much better than running away. What do you say about that?" "I can't stay. The prospect of developing mindfulness to improve myself can't begin to rival my fear of Acharya Mun. It's like pitting a cat against an elephant. Just thinking that he knows all about me is enough to make me shiver. How could I possibly maintain any degree of mindfulness? I'm leaving today. If I remain here, I'll die for sure. Please believe me." The layman told Acharya Mun that he felt sorry for the old monk, but he didn't know how to prevent him from leaving. His face was so pale it was obvious that he was frightened, so I had to let him go. Before he left, I asked him where he was going. He said he didn't know, but that he'd die first. We'd probably meet again someday. Then he left. I had a boy to send him off. When the boy returned, I asked him, but he didn't know, for the elderly monk hadn't told him where he was going. I feel really sorry for him. An old man like that. He shouldn't have taken it so personally. Acharya Mun was deeply dismayed to see his benevolent intentions producing such negative results, his compassion being the cause of such unfortunate consequences. In truth, seeing the elderly monk's stunned reaction that very day, he had suspected then that this might happen. After that day, he was disinclined to send out his flow chitta to investigate, fearing he might again meet with the same situation. In the end, his suspicions were confirmed. He told the layman that he'd spoken with the old monk in the familiar way that friends normally do, playful one moment, serious the next. He never imagined it becoming such a big issue that the elderly monk would feel compelled to abandon his monastery and flee like that. This incident became an important lesson, determining how Acharya Mun behaved towards all the many people he met throughout his life. He was concerned that such an incident might be repeated should he fail to make a point of carefully considering the circumstances before speaking. From that day on, he never cautioned people directly about the specific contents of their thoughts. He merely alluded indirectly to certain types of thinking as a means of helping people become aware of the nature of their thoughts, but without upsetting their feelings. People's minds are like small children, tottering uncertainly as they learn to walk. An adult's job is to merely watch them carefully so they come to no harm. There is no need to be overly protective all the time. The same applies to people's minds. They should be allowed to learn by their own experiences. Sometimes their thinking will be right, sometimes wrong, sometimes good, sometimes bad. This is only natural. It's unreasonable to expect them to be perfectly good and correct them every time. So, interesting story of Acharya Mun correcting an elderly monk. So a couple of reflections. One is Acharya Mun's ability to read people's minds. And what I find fascinating is we learn about these spiritual abilities within the Buddhist canon, but to actually hear and read directly somebody who has that ability and the experiences of that is quite fascinating. But I think what's particularly striking to me is actually Acharya Mun's willingness to learn from his experience. And this one particularly was around communication. That we can have the insight, maybe you could say, of another person's difficulty. We might even have compassion, wanting to help them. But if we don't have the skillful means, the upaya, we can actually cause harm. For instance, I think this happens a lot of times with parents and children. Right? As a mom or a dad, we've seen the kids doing things that we know will bring harm. Maybe they're hanging out with friends that we think are a bad influence on them. Or maybe they start to develop habits that, sleeping really late, or I know what would be apparent in a child. Not taking a bath, I don't know. Not brushing their teeth. Playing a lot of video games. During our CEI, one mom said the kid was watching movies late at night, hiding under their bed or something like that. Right? And as a parent, we realize, gosh, that's not a way to live. And you're going to create a lot of affliction for yourself, constantly not having a balanced lifestyle. And so what do? One is you can really be overprotective and try to control every detail of the child's life. But I think what often happens is that the child then just gets afflicted even more because the parent is just too controlling. It's not skillful. So the parent can have wisdom, insight, can have compassion, but then doesn't have another component of wisdom, which is upaya, skillful means. Knowing how to deliver to insight in just the right way so that the child can actually happily change. And that's not easy. That's not easy. And I think here for us, I know we have a couple of us all living in the monastery together. We have Dharma Master Jing Fo, and then Jing Wei Shi and myself, with Jing Liang Shi, and then Liu Shige and Jasky and Alex. And I think a big question is, how do we skillfully interact with each other? I think as we live together, we realize that all of us have our places of weaknesses, also strengths, places that we can work on. And we might have good intentions and want to help each other, but sometimes we might not have the skillful means. So I really think that's something to really develop. And just to use Ajahn Mun's story as a kind of example, he you could say maybe made a mistake sharing what he did to this elderly monk, causing him to be afraid and then run away. But Acharya Mun did a couple of things. Number one, he noticed the way that his words were landing on the monk. That's something I think we can often do, is just observe. When I say something, what's the body language? And number two, as something happens, we can reflect, so what happened afterwards when we said something? Did it actually help? And I think just with those two things, if we do that, and we actually learn from it, we begin to develop an inner discernment on how to be skillful with our speech and actions. Okay, so maybe today, I'm guessing people can't read each other's minds, so that won't be the task for today. I think if you could try to develop some upaya around our speech, right? Maybe we just be a little bit more careful in the words that we say and the way that we say it. It might be quite wonderful to see what comes out when we are skillful in our words. Okay, let's do 3 steps from now.